I think it's perhaps unfortunate that you should have mentioned I, Claudius, as the character that I played in that wonderful series was probably one of the most despicable individuals, certainly insofar as his relationship with women was concerned. So please forget the character of Aelius Sejanus. He was a wretch and died with his throat cut on the Capitol steps, which was no more than he deserved. Good evening. It has always seemed to me that the symbol for Amnesty International, the candle inside the barbed wire, is brilliant and appropriate, because what Amnesty has done from its very foundation almost 50 years ago is to shine a light into dark corners, into those dark corners where bad people don't want you to look. Darkness is the friend of repression and cruelty and torture. I am not a candle. I am not a taper, but I might be one match in a box of swan vestas, insofar as the campaign of violence against women is concerned, and domestic violence in particular. A couple of months ago, having read a report in The Guardian of 3 women who were all presently completing their sentences for having murdered their partners, I was so moved by the stories of these 3 women that I think for the first time ever I was compelled to send off a response to it to The Guardian, which they printed. And in that, one of the things that I said was that that I was not a violent child, but if my mother had at any point during between the ages of 5 and 12 picked up a knife or any other weapon against my father, I would have held her hand as she did it. I would have locked the door while she carried it out. That's how bad it was to be growing up inside a violent household. A little bit about my own story. And it has taken me many years to be able to talk about this, even in these protected and supportive surroundings. My father was a soldier, and in 1945 finished his military service as a superstar. He was regimental sergeant major of the parachute regiment, and it really doesn't get much grander than that in terms of non-commissioned officers. There is only one regimental sergeant major, and he stands at the pinnacle of all the other ranks in that regiment. He was brilliant at his job, hugely successful. I've spoken to, well, now long dead, but I spoke to men who served with him who spoke of how impressive he was. In fact, one man said to me, when your father walked onto the parade ground, the birds in the trees stopped singing. In 1945, by the end of 1945, he was working in a glass blowing factory, laboring, and from there he went on to paint bridges for the rail companies, and over the decades a variety of other jobs, became an unhappy and angry and resentful man, and turned into a weekend alcoholic. I didn't even know that there was such a term for many, many years, but I realize now that's exactly what my father was. He was a perfectly well-functioning individual, Monday through Friday, tea time. Hardworking and tough to be around, but a decent enough man. But from Friday evening to Sunday night, he was a drunk. And when he was drunk, he lost control of himself, and he particularly lost control of his hands. I was 5 when this began. a few facts. About 10 women commit suicide every week as a result of their contact with domestic violence or violence of partners or ex-partners. 2 women are murdered by their partners or their ex-partners every week. Everyone suffers. No one escapes the trauma of those experiences. And it's why I liken myself to a Swan Vesta match, in that being able to speak about what it was like to be in a small room, in a small house, when a big, strong individual has lost control, when you feel helpless and uncared for, and also, of course, and this is probably the hardest part as the years go by, responsible too. As a child in those circumstances, I became an expert on the escalation of violence. I could monitor the temperature in that room so accurately, even without being in the room. If I was upstairs in my bedroom or sitting on the steps behind the door that led into that room, I could monitor the temperature of the growing anger in the room, to the extent that I knew exactly the moment when I had to intervene, either by throwing open the door or throwing myself between my parents. Because I knew exactly what would trigger the act, finally, of physical violence against my mother. Children shouldn't become experts in things like that. And yet it seems to me that only by talking about these experiences can one help to expose them. We come back to the candle again. I came to realize that I too had problems to do with violence. I know what it feels like to be on the very edge of losing control towards another person, particularly towards a female. I never actually lost control, but I know what it feels like to want to let it go. It was so pronounced with me that when I became a professional actor, the one thing that I could never perform were acts of violence, or even be angry or violent. I had to fake it. I was so afraid that if I didn't fake it, that something would spiral out of control and I would once again be possessed with feelings that were destructive. As a child, certainly then, and due to campaigns like this and the raised awareness of issues of domestic violence, there are outlets. I'm a patron of Refuge, for example, which is doing great work and has done for over 40 years since Erin Pitsey opened her first safe house for women and their children in Chiswick. But there was nowhere to go when I was a child. No one to turn to, not even neighbors who knew about it. They heard it and they kept silent. And I do recall on 2 occasions when the police had to be called and the ambulance came because my mother was lying on the floor bleeding. I recall so vividly hearing a policeman say, "Well, Mrs. Stewart, it takes 2 to make an argument." Or, "You must have done something to provoke him." No, she had not. She'd done nothing. And even if she had, violence is a choice. And it's a choice that a man makes. We can choose to stop it. The lasting impact on my mother, and indeed on my father, who by Monday mornings was ashamed and humiliated by the things that had happened over the weekend, and indeed on myself and on my brother, was extreme. Overcoming the lessons of that male stereotype that I was being shown in those so important formative years has been a struggle. It costs 26 billion to our country every year to deal with issues relating to domestic violence, medical care, housing, legal issues, and so forth. 1 in 4 women, which means a significant number in this room, will at some point in their lives experience violence by a partner. And in this also one should not overlook that there are situations, they're rare but they do exist, in which the male is the victim of domestic violence. It does occur. A couple of weeks ago there was a shocking report about the high percentage of men in prison currently who are ex-soldiers or men who are on remand. It saddened me somewhat to see that always left to the very end of this report was that there is a huge incidence of domestic violence also linked to soldiers who have finished their service, or even soldiers who are still in their service but home on leave. But it was one of the things that was kind of pushed to one side, as opposed to the other issues of prison sentences and so forth. It is still something that is shameful. People will not talk about it. Victims will not talk about it. Those who are perpetrators of the violence will not seek help. And of course, the children, most of all, find it impossible to talk about it. But the only reason that I am striking my match is that hopefully by illustrating what it has been like to be in an environment of such violence, and that it can pass, and that one can survive it, and even though sometimes still a struggle lead a life without violence, is why I'm so happy to support this campaign and applaud Amnesty taking on this issue of the rights of women, but particularly insofar as they are victims of domestic violence. Thank you.